Hi, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and you're watching What Wize Women Want, here on Public Access Television, Comcast Channel 13. Every week, we try to bring you panels of women to discuss topics. Hopefully, you can make informed choices for yourself, your family, your children, and your community. Ladies, we are 52% of the population with 85% of the purchasing power. And what we'd like to do is to be able to have you use it for change. If you would like to learn about the topics each week on our program, you can go in advance to our website at www.whatwizewomenwant.com. And remember, Wize is spelled with a Z. There you can find details not only about the topics we'll be speaking about, but also all of the panelists who are speaking and who will be speaking on our programs, any contact information, and any questions that you have. Our shows are taped a week in advance, so if you have a question for next week's show, you are welcome to send it along and we'll try to bring it into our program next week. We also have fireside chats at City Space on the downtown mall every third Saturday of the month, and we hope you'll join us there. This week's topic is, what is a good education? I've spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill with politicians, with educators, and I realize that everyone uses the term good education, but are we all really speaking about the same thing? What is a good education? So today we're going to have three women who are going to help us determine what a good education is. To my right is Leslie Nathanial. She's the Vice President of the Organization of Virginia Homeschoolers, a statewide inclusive nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting and empowering families that choose homeschooling. Next to her is Sara Johnson. Sara has been at Charlottesville's Renaissance School, which is a private school, when she began teaching studio art. In 2009, she was the school executive committee as dean of students, and now she has become the second head of school. To her right is Ashby Kindler. She is an educator in the public school system and doesn't easily fit into the mold of the public school system, I must say, for she is the principal of 5 charter schools in the state of Virginia, Murray High School and the Community Public Charter School, to name a few. Okay, ladies, with this diverse background here, we have homeschooling, private school, and public school. I thought we would be able to now think about what it means to have a good education. Now, before we define things, we always say that education is important in our nation. However, it seems to me that we really don't back up what we say. For example, when I open up the newspaper, there's an entire section on sports, but I don't see a whole section on education. So in your school, in your area, and from your perspective, what do you gear your education towards? Ashby?
It's a big question. First, I'm going to make a correction there. I'm principal of 2 of 5 charter schools in Virginia. So there are 5, and I have 2 of them here in Albemarle County. And both of those schools, and I think we'll probably hear today that we have more in common than we have that are divergent goals. But both of those schools share a desire to meet students where they are. Where in both of them, we are trying to create a more intimate schooling environment for students. We're trying to allow more autonomy for students and more of an experiential learning environment. Community Public Charter School is a middle school, and there we're particularly focusing on an arts-infused, not an arts performance program, but an arts-infused project-based learning opportunity, which we think is, particularly for middle schoolers, just the right age to try to take them a little further away from books, textbooks, and worksheets, and more into an experiential learning environment. In Murray High School, and in both schools, we use mastery learning. So we're pretty dedicated to having kids feel confident about doing high-level work and not letting them get lower grades. So we believe that they can learn and learn well, and so we'll support them until they do.
Sara, how about your model in the Renaissance School?
For us, we really try to combine the best of a traditional education with a greater expectation of taking ownership. We do serve high ability students. So our students who come in are motivated. We look for independent thinkers, individuals. We are small by design. We have to be able to serve that type of a student. For us, our students have the choice of between 3 graduation streams. So they really do have an ownership of where they're going and what they're doing. We try to, or believe high school is for developing a deep foundation in the arts, sciences, and humanities. So we want to approach the whole student, not just a student whose strength may be in math or science and only developing that side of the student. We really try to focus on balancing out the whole student, strengthening areas they might be more average in while also challenging the areas that they're really strong in. That really is sort of our approach to education in our school.
And homeschooling. Sometimes it's a mystery for people. Why don't you give us a little bit of background of homeschooling?
Okay. It's legal in all 50 states, but every state regulates it slightly differently. In Virginia, once a parent has complied with the basic responsibility to notify the state that they're going to home educate and to provide a certain level of detail along with that, they're free to choose how to educate their child and in what subjects and what manner. And at the end of the year, they also have to file a proof of progress with the local school board. And those two things, or local school superintendent, excuse me, those two things together kind of bookend that school year. In between, parents have complete freedom, and so there's as many different combinations as there are kids, really. Some people's home education program might look very similar to school. They might spend a lot of time working with traditional books and worksheets and doing traditional projects. Other people are at the opposite end of the spectrum, and they're doing a lot of experiential learning. They're spending most of their time out in the world, exploring and traveling, doing different kinds of activities while they do those. For most families, there's a kind of ebb and flow and mix between the two, depending on what they're studying and what stage of their child's education they're working with.
Okay, so in order to be able to determine what constitutes a good education, it seems to me that the more people I talk to, the more people don't understand what education is in our country. Some people think it's for college prep. Some people think it's for life skills. You know, what is your focus? I mean, in public education, it would appear to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that listening to the president and legislators, that we want everybody to go to college. So what are we preparing children for when we are teaching them? Ashby.
I think that ultimately we're preparing them for choice, that we're hoping that they have strong skills and a strong knowledge set that they would be able to pursue whatever would be attractive to them, whether that be college or ultimately we hope they're going to work and we hope they're going to legal work. And so we want them to be able to define what path that would take them. And that may be college and it may not be. Or I think increasingly we're going to see that kids are going to, that adult learners are going to move in and out of educational opportunities, whether that's going to work and then being trained for a specific skill set and improving, or whether they're changing jobs. So they need to be prepared to be lifelong learners themselves and to be able to identify which options are available for them and to know their strengths and to know their weaknesses. So I think we're looking at having kids be able to own their future and being able to help determine it and be confident that they have an array of choices and aren't limited because they don't have the background or skills to be able to exercise some of those choices.
So what I hear you saying then is that it's much more about business, work, and continuing education in terms of the public schools. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, when you put it that way, I think that there's a whole other side to education, which is just learning for the joy of learning.
Okay.
That's inherently fun,
okay.
and that we don't want to lose that part as well.
Okay.
I guess I look at it a little bit as learning in terms of preparing yourself for work, and I would hope that that's work that you enjoy, so the two are going hand in hand.
Okay. Leslie, the same for you?
I think the purpose of education is to prepare for being a good occupant of the world. And by that, I mean someone that can ideally provide for themselves and for any family that they may have, and also contribute something to the larger good. A college education, learning a trade, those may be steps along the way. But kind of as Ashby said, it's really about lifelong learning, about finding what interests you so that you can pursue that, knowing how to get the next pieces of knowledge you need to get you wherever it is you want to go so that you can contribute something to the world.
So ladies, each one of you has a different student type that is attracted to your model. Sara, at the Renaissance School, you have the higher, capacity child. The public schools, all children tend to be in the public schools, and as the same as for homeschooling. So, how would you define what kind of child best thrives in your? I don't think every child thrives in the same situations. So what type of child, Leslie, thrives best as a homeschooler? Do they have to be independent and, be able to work on their own?
Absolutely not. We like to say that homeschooling is not for everyone, but it can be for anyone. Really, it can match any kind of child because it's about matching what you do and how you do it to that particular child. It's completely customizable. So for a gifted child, homeschooling lets them really focus on the things they're interested in. They can move at their own pace. They can spend some extra time if they need to on things that aren't quite their area of strengths. For a struggling learner, they can really go for mastery, as Ashby mentioned. They can spend more time on the things or find the technique that works really well for them. For those kids that are some ways in the middle, sometimes they can kind of get lost in the middle of a big, busy school day, and it can be their chance to shine too. It really fits just about anything, as long as you have parents that have that kind of model of, well, I'm going to start with this particular mode of working because it seems like it'll be great, but we're open to change if it turns out my child needs something else.
I think one of the things that you're hearing in common with all of our programs is a sense of intimacy and responsiveness to the learner and to the child. So although we have as do homeschoolers, of course, a broad array of students, what our students have in common is that they're looking for something that where they'll feel well known and will have some voice in that. So in both of my programs, we have a range of students who are, just as you described, very gifted learners, very interested in school, and much more reluctant learners, or very anxious students, or I guess many of them are very visual learners and very artistic, and so they're looking for more of an outlet to express that. But they, and interestingly enough, we're often attractive both in the middle and the high school level to students who have homeschooled. So now they're looking for something in a more traditional model, or they can't continue to homeschool for a variety of
I think
reasons.
that's an important point too. Just because a child is a homeschooler at some point in their life doesn't mean that they have always been or that they will always be.
Right.
Some families move in and out of homeschooling. They may have one child in the school system and one child that's at home. Some families homeschool just for a year or so. They might have medical conditions, or they might have a chance to travel.
Sarah, what do you do with a student who, I mean, you have the higher end student. What happens if they fall behind or?
Well, certainly. Well, first, for us, we do have quite a few homeschool students in our history. We actually started a part-time program specifically with homeschoolers in mind as they transition into the idea of high school. But yeah, for us, we have the high ability student, but it's the high ability students in the arts, sciences, or humanities. And so what ends up happening is in this building, we have such a diverse group of kids whose interests are all over the place and whose passions are everywhere. And what ends up happening is there's this kind of immense amount of respect towards each other that starts to happen, because if someone is strong in one area, the other may be struggling with, but they outshine in another area, and they all are under the same roof together in close proximity. The students are placed in classes that at their level. So there's grade mixing. They're not just in 9th grade classes or 10th grade classes. They may be in a class with a senior as a 9th or 10th grader if that's their strength. We don't teach to a test. We don't have AP classes. We don't teach to the AP, but we have many students who opt to take the AP and do quite well on the APs. We want students who will take advantage of having an expert teaching them in the subject they have their PhD in. So most of our teachers do have their terminal degree, because the students that we get often need to be taught beyond a high school level, but aren't quite ready to be on the campus of UVA or PVCC, though many often do go on to do dual enrollment when they get older.
Okay, so you all have really explained to me, I think, the intellectual part of your, perspective models. So what do you do with a child who's emotionally distraught, comes from a broken home, is a single parent home, has violent issues or things of that? How do you deal with children's emotional needs in this, umbrella of constant focus on their intellectual prowess and skill sets in terms of business?
So at Murray and at CPCS, but Murray is a more well-developed program over time, I think we're particularly adept at dealing with all of those kinds of issues. First of all, we think that schools should be a safe place for kids. And we know that their emotional issues need to be addressed before they can learn well. So if they're upset over a fight with their friends or a fight between their parents at home, that they're not going to be able to learn very well. So we emphasize a mediation system at both schools that we're responsive. We offer mediation, we offer it quickly, and we help kids learn those skills, and we help them learn some conflict resolution skills. We talk a lot about nonviolent communication and connecting habits. So we also help students sort of figure out where their role is in the family, and that they can impact how communication happens amongst their friends, amongst their peers, with their teachers, and in their families, and we help model that for them.
It seems to me that the most successful schools, in whatever model they are, have 250 to 300 students or less, because that is the school where the principal knows everyone by name. And so I've taught in schools in Philadelphia, in some of the poorest sections of Philadelphia, where a second grader came in and was just wild. And until we sat down and spoke with him, we did not know that his mother had stabbed his father, who was in the hospital, and this was his experience prior to showing up in the classroom. So, education has become kind of a dumping ground for everything. The ills of our culture, single parent homes, divorce, and so these emotional issues are things that we have to deal with that may have not had in the past in terms of the educational system. Sara, what is it like for you?
Ours is certainly a little bit different because of just the application process. We really do get a sense of where these kids are coming from. And we also are very aware of what our capabilities are. We don't have, an on-site therapist or nurse for the students. So we have to be really focusing on that in the admissions process. The thing that we do look for, though, and it's tricky because when you get into high ability students, sometimes what may have been acting out early on in their life was sheerly boredom within a classroom. Exactly. And I have heard story after story from parents themselves, but also from educators who had the student beforehand or whatever, who would tell me things about a student or behavior about a student, and you pretty quickly can figure out if they're reacting because out of boredom within the subject area that they really are. It's a very different type of situation, certainly. That being said, I've worked with so many students going through, again, those teenage years where they really are learning how to be in a relationship themselves while their parents are going through a separation. And how do you walk a child through that when oftentimes at that age they're not communicating completely openly at home? Those of us who have had teenage know what I'm saying. Right. And so a lot of times you do find yourself saying, okay, where is that line? Because I see you during waking hours probably more, right. And so where is that line? And also creating that safe environment for them so that they are speaking to an adult, which is really important, which is what they want to do. But you want to make sure that they are being guided properly. And so we really work collectively as a team. We meet weekly about our students if something's going on. There's open communication between the parents and myself, and then I will ultimately make a decision as to where that needs to go from there.
Well, I guess the reason why some people don't homeschool the entire time may have to do with the fact that the children may not get along with their parents or listen to them, or, we all know what it's like to raise children and, have discipline problems. And I can because I homeschooled my children, but there are problems that arise, emotional issues and those kinds of things between parent and child. So how does homeschooling, what happens in that kind of situation?
Well, for one thing that's different from a lot of people that have kind of a school mindset, they think that a parent has to kind of take off their mommy or daddy hat and put it on the table and put on the teacher hat. When you're actually homeschooling and you're working with your own child, the one that that you've raised from the time that they were tiny, it's much more like helping your 4-year-old learn to set the table or your 5-year-old learn to tie their shoes. It's not, you must learn this right this very second and this is the only way that we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. It's an evolving process. And you've worked on that relationship all the way along. So sometimes the families that struggle the most are ones who may have had their kids in school for a while. They're coming out of school and they're figuring out how to find that new balance and that new flow. And obviously that can take some time and some practice and some patience.
And is the most essential relationship we have is with our families. Mm-hmm. Right. And so it's the building block and the stepping stone for the rest of our lives. So whatever that relationship is really imperative for the future. One of the things that baffles me in legislation is that we've legislated ourselves to the point where we focus on the bottom so much, trying to bring children up from the bottom, that all the children who are smart and come to school learning and all of that have to sit in the classroom and constantly, as you said, deal with boredom because they already know everything that's going on. So how can you possibly, and we're not talking about huge public schools here, or huge schools here. So it seems to me that the different focuses that you all have eliminate that public school sort of and the schools that take in everybody by focusing everything at the bottom to try and bring everybody up. Am I understanding you correctly in that? And you probably get those students, as you said, Sara, with the boredom. So, but I know that you have.
But I do. We do as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's probably some common threads with some of the students we get who are looking for more autonomy. And so we try to be more responsive to what their needs are. I think we have a little bit more of the range of abilities, but the same experience when you talk about mixing kids by different grade levels and different, for us it would be vastly different ability levels in a classroom. But we're also working on teaching them to appreciate each other and understand that their strengths are not defined by a state test, and that who they are as learners. And so they begin to see what a parent sees from the beginning is the gifts of their child. And we want them to begin to appreciate that about each other. And that, in turn, might turn a more reluctant learner in what we would consider in a schooling setting a reluctant learner, because we're all learners all the time.
Right.
They find their strengths, and when they gain confidence, they blossom, and then they show their strengths, and they develop along the way. And so students begin to appreciate each other, and they begin to help develop each other.
It seems like you all have to fight against the public, the politicians, the legislators, because everybody constantly talks about testing. And our children hear all these conversations. They're not oblivious to all these conversations. And, to get into better college, whatever it is, to do the state testing, your standing in the ranking, all of these things all depend on testing. And as a therapist, I can tell you that I have seen children who are completely become obsessed, with the testing issue to the exclusion of being a learner or, being a whole person. And so I know that you probably all don't focus on the testing themselves. So what is it that you all do in order to keep a balance so that child isn't always focused on their test scores or taking tests all the time? Leslie?
When my own kids were young, they literally only took one test a year. And that was to satisfy that state requirement to document their proof of educational progress. As a parent, when you only have, a few children in your care, it's really easy to know, can they read well? What are they struggling with? What kinds of math can they do quickly and easily? And what's a struggle? The time my daughter was learning percentages, we would have her calculate the tip if we went out to eat. It's very quick and easy, so you don't need those tests.
So it's real learning.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that made it very low stress, and they actually enjoyed their once a year chance to bubble in things. As they got older, the things go up. My oldest now is getting ready to apply for college, and she's had more than what I think of as her fair share of testing in that effort to document what she knows, what her qualifications are. There's many different paths. Some parents choose to do a lot more testing along the way. Some choose little or no testing. So it really becomes, again, about that balancing act. Where does my child want to go? What does that path require? How do we do those things? Do tests really upset my child? What's another path we can take? And we can work on bringing those test skills along more slowly, because we all have to take some of them. If you want a driver's license, you're going to have to take a test. No one can escape it entirely.
Okay. Sarah? Testing.
It's a great question. I have lots of opinions on it. We, as a school, we hosted the film No Child Left Behind 2 years ago. And we certainly test. We are as I said, we're very, very traditional in so many ways. But we make sure that the value of the test within a particular subject area does not outweigh participation, or it does not outweigh sort of their efforts. For instance, most math tests come back, the students will take them home and rework them for partial credit to help raise their score if it was low, because it is about learning the material. It's about nothing more than learning it. We believe completely in that learning deeply. They learn then how to apply the information they've kind of collected in the classroom. And we allow our students not encourage the tests like the AP, but we give them the choice. If a teacher thinks they're ready to take on the added responsibility of preparing for an AP exam, then the teacher will ask the student if they're interested, or the students will approach their teacher saying, I think I'd like to take the AP in this subject area, I really like it, I'm willing to do the extra work. All of our students take the PSAT. And it's not because scores at the 9th grade level matter. It's because it's just the practice of sitting there taking this exam for an extended period of time, an exam within the format of that type of a standardized exam. We think it's important that they go through that, just the practice of it, and they do it as 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. It is
with no pressure.
With no pressure, no, and it's never the focus of the curriculum. In fact, if a student came to me, because I do work with them on their placement in their classes, I will 10 times over encourage dual enrollment over taking an AP test. I would much rather have them, if they're old enough and ready and the parents are on the same page, have them go through that practice of going to a college campus and being taught by a professor and having that experience, rather than preparing for a test. And so it's interesting because you do have, it's part of playing the game. You have to be really aware of college and the college prep aspect. Yes. And yeah.
You are listening to, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and you are watching What Wize Women Want. And we are here discussing what constitutes a good education here on our station Public Access Television, Comcast Channel 13. And we are with Leslie Nathanial of Homeschooling, and Sara Johnson of the Renaissance School, and Ashby Kindler of the charter schools in Albemarle County. Ashby, let's get back to testing. I know in public schools, public schools are, your funding is determined by testing and your ranking, and there's pressure from the Department of Education now. So how do you deal with it?
Well, and in Virginia, charter schools are not exempt from any of the standards of accreditation or standards of learning that maybe exist. The laws may be different in other states, but in Virginia, you're really held accountable in the same way. So, though what we would value in terms of a good education, which is students having an authentic audience, that they're writing and that they're drawing and painting and building, and also able to communicate some more basic skills, but we wouldn't really want to assess by a multiple choice test. But we're still accountable at the end of the year to all of that testing, aside from the ACT, the SAT and the ACTs and all those other options for students looking at college. And in some ways, it's like serving two masters. The SOL testing certainly focuses on us on the state curriculum, which that is our guiding curriculum as a state school. We are a public school. But then we also have to assess in that same way. It's one thing to teach and guide your curriculum by some content that somebody else has determined. Another thing then to assess that way. And so I think it's a particular challenge for our teachers and obviously for our students, and that we are sort of instructing one way and then we have to shift into test prep mode. It takes time and takes a lot of energy. And as a state, we've sort of gone way to the extreme with some of the testing. One of our students last year took 8 hours to finish a geometry SOL.
Wow.
I am so proud of him that he decided that he could do it, and that he knew he could do it, and if he took his time, he could prove to everybody else he could do it. I'm dismayed that we put an experience in front of him that would take him that long to do.
Wow.
So finding that balance is really difficult. I understand the accountability, but that's not, I don't think that was ever the intent, but it is the reality for many students. Many of our students won't have the resilience They won't have the resilience.
that's
They
true.
could do it if they
That's
would
true.
spend that 8 hours. I don't think many of our legislators would spend their 8
They
hours.
shouldn't do it for 8 hours.
What I hear is they won't read the health care bill. So,
Well, I have to tell you that we all are in educational realms here, and I have a feeling much of our audience may be dismayed at a lot of us as educators because it's called the lingua franca of our profession, and we constantly throw out terms like AOLs, yes, SOLs, and all the other kinds of things that we do. And I'm sure parents are as frustrated with education and the things that come down from above as we are in terms of trying to uphold all those things. And one of the things that I think is really significant in having a conversation here is about the teachers. Is a teacher a professional or are they a public servant? I think we're confused in this country. We would never treat a physician who we consider a professional the way we treat teachers. And yet our expectation is they have to go through the same kinds of education and the same types of professionalism that any other profession would go through. And yet we treat them like public servants.
and be absolutely as responsive to the needs as an individual as we would hope your doctor
Exactly.
or your
Yes.
attorney
Exactly.
would be to your needs as you pay them for their services.
So how do we differentiate here between treating a teacher as a professional? And I mean this in the sense that, we create all of what they're supposed to be doing in the classroom and give them no opportunity to do what it is that they need to do, which is, in the homeschooling classroom, you can basically create what you want for your child. But in the school setting, you've got all kinds of rules, especially for teachers. So how do we, what do we do here?
Virtually any parent in the state of Virginia can homeschool their child. They're free to choose what and how they want to do it. The state does want some degree of assurance that child is making adequate academic progress from year to year, and there's some flexibility in how you show that as well. But in between, anything that a parent wants to do to support and further that child's education, it's at that family's choice about how to make it happen.
So you have PhDs teaching in your school. How much flexibility do you give them and how much do you treat them as professionals? I mean, if I were a PhD in a classroom, I would certainly want, a lot of flexibility.
I give them a lot of flexibility. They are the experts in that particular subject area. I do ask the faculty, they have to have an awareness of the SOLs. They have to have an awareness of what the students within the state of Virginia are learning in for instance, a public school. Because students move, students transfer, and that happens, and they have to be ready to transfer successfully. So they certainly have to have that awareness. They also, my faculty have to have the awareness of what is on an AP exam, what is in the SATs, what's in the ACTs. They have to have that knowledge, but they design their curriculum to what they believe is best for that student given their expertise in that subject area. What do these kids need to know about chemistry? What do these kids need to know about physics or math or whatever it is? So we do a series of assessments to make sure everything, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But we do the series of assessments, and the kids, because the teachers clearly love what they're teaching, they buy into it. They are interested. They become more engaged. They see that this teacher has chosen this path for a reason. And have my teachers always been strong in the particular subject areas? No, which makes them even more relatable to the students. One of my favorites is our chemistry teacher who talks about failing math as a high school student, but then fell in love with it in college, and now she, and then became a chemist. So it's just it's a wonderful way to relate to the students who do struggle. I mean, we will have a student who comes in with 12 years of classical violin training, and that's why they're there, because they want to go on to Berkeley or what College of Music or whatever it is, but really, really have huge gaps in foundation in mathematics.
Yes.
And so we have, I mean, you talk about a spread. We have this happening all the time. And how do you nurture this while you're also supporting this and building that foundation? And you can only do it in a smaller setting. It's the only way you can give them what they need. And to do it in a way that's focused on them. And also in that setting, when you have these experts teaching it and you see the class is responding to this particular subject or part of the subject, you can go there. You can go deeper with it, especially if it's a group of high ability students. You can really, really get into the nuts and bolts of it and not worry about falling behind and preparing for the test. I don't want to shoot down the SOLs because I think the APs fall in the same boat, and that's more of where we're dealing with. And it's exactly, I mean, there's APs courses all over the place, but we don't do it.
So a lot, I mean, what you're talking about is a lot of what I see in therapy, because you can have these brilliant students who have emotional bankruptcy or spiritual bankruptcy, and you have to, you know, here is this intellectual level up here, and somehow or other you have to get them to be balanced in terms of their emotions because of their frustrations and things like that. So back to the teachers in public school, are they public servants or are they treated as professionals?
Well, are they, and how are they treated? Absolutely, they're professionals. We have a bit of a culture in the United States of bashing education and teachers.
Yes.
And so we don't stop to, as a culture, we don't stop to ask that question very often. So if we ask it more, we'll probably continue to answer that indeed teachers are professionals.
And when are we going to let them do their thing in the classroom that they have been trained to do? I mean, you know, now we're talking about retraining teachers and everything is at fault instead of allowing what happens at the ground level instead of having all this disseminate from above. When I was testifying on Capitol Hill once, and I said to the panel, when was the last time you stepped into a classroom? You know, it's completely different from when you graduated from school. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's such a disconnect here from the people who are making laws that govern us in attempting to do things in the classroom and those that are really in the nitty-gritty day-to-day kinds of activities.
Look, the question shouldn't be about retraining teachers. It should be about allowing teachers to develop in the ways that they need to meet the needs of their students.
Exactly.
Most teachers, like most parents, want to do the best job they can. Mm-hmm. And if what they're doing isn't working for a student, then they know they either haven't figured out something about the student or that there's a knowledge set and a skill set they don't have, and they're spending their time trying to find ways to engage students, find better ways to teach math, more intriguing ways to teach reading, and what the research says about teaching reading, which has changed over many years. They want that to be successful.
Yes.
So it's not about telling them that they have to. It's creating the opportunity and creating the resources and the support. Just as homeschool parents connect with each other when they find that they don't have a particular skill set, or Algebra 2 is, you know, they've forgotten it all, or they're not as interested, but they're really interested in science, so they connect.
Absolutely.
You know, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm. People use co-ops where you find somebody else who has some skills that maybe you don't have yourself, and you work together. And so a friend of mine and I collaborate, and one year she taught our girls biology and history along with a few other kids. Meanwhile, I was teaching them algebra. There are other times when you get together and work with somebody just because some projects go better as part of a group effort, and other things that you study in a more solitary way. Certainly we have more flexibility than your average public school student. If you pick a math book and it's not working well for your student, there's 1,000,001 books that you can get. Usually a public school teacher has only a couple on the shelf, and then they have to figure out what to do with the rest of the class.
That's a great segue into what I want to talk about
next.
And
that's when they're inventing it.
Yes.
You know, that's when they're writing it for the students.
And I would just throw in really quickly, I think sometimes it falls into that the idea of the reward and the threat of SOL results and that sort of thing. And so teachers are functioning in a very different place than they normally would because of that reward threat balance, the threat of loss of accreditation, threat of their jobs, whatever it is. It's not a way to be a best teacher. It's just not a way to function.
Well, you gave me a segue into something that really intrigues me, and that is with the process of schools. Process is slow introducing new things. And here we are in this technology age where things are happening so rapidly. I walked into a classroom in the state of Pennsylvania and I opened up a textbook that looked rather old to me, and the copyright date on it was 1950. I could not believe my eyes. And so how is it that, what are you doing in order to help your child? Everything on the internet is not true. How do you help children discriminate and disseminate information when they've got, you're competing with the computer and old textbooks that don't have appropriate information? And I mean, it's wow, that's an amazing conundrum. Anyone?
I mean, as homeschoolers, as my kids have grown older, we've used more textbooks than we did in the past, but we tend to use them sort of as portals.
Okay.
They can be a good place to get a broad overview of information, and then you go from there and you find out what research is more current than this. And when I'm picking something that I'm interested in to delve in more deeply, how do you decide what is a reliable source, what to rely on? I think increasingly textbooks can be updated more regularly, because if they're published electronically, after you complete one segment, you can update it. You don't have to wait till you're ready to do the whole book. And they can include more things like web clips and live demonstrations of experiments, all of those extra kinds of pieces. And I think we're just poised on that horizon where it becomes more widely available.
Do you know how long it takes to create a textbook? 10 years in research.
7 to 10 years.
I mean, by the time it's published, it's already out of date.
Yeah.
Sarah, what do you do?
We take a little bit of a unique approach, I think, to the idea of sort of media and also the dissemination of media and information. We want the students to slow down. We want them to hear what they're learning and to understand it and process it. So we don't require, and we're not looking to transition anytime soon into integrating, iPads or whatever into the classroom for every child. The teachers use kind of media within their own classrooms the way that they best see fit for their particular subject area. And they also have a choice as to whether or not the students are allowed to use them in their classrooms at any given day. It doesn't have to be across the board. And so within that context and within that, okay, now is the time where we're going to talk about what we're reading online or what we're looking at online. Within that context are teachable moments, and that's really how we try to focus. But we really push to pick up a book, turn the page. Our memory remembers placements of words within the context of depth and not a flatness of a screen. And when you're trying to develop these young minds to really remember and to think deeply and be able to apply that information, you have to be able to teach them that way. And in this kind of era of distraction, I mean, that's because you can have multiple pages up at one time and they're very quick with it.
Right.
So you have to make choices, and and I do trust the teachers to make their own choices for their classrooms. I myself teach a college counseling class, and I don't want computers in it. I want them to write down what I'm saying. I don't give them handouts. They have to learn how to take strong notes. And so if you give them everything and if it's always available, then when are they thinking about what they need? Right, for themselves, because it becomes about them. What do you want? What do you need? This is your life, not mine, not your parents. It's your life. What do you want? And so learning how to separate out what's important is key.
I saw a documentary on the TIM study several years ago, and they were demonstrating children in a Japanese classroom versus children in an American classroom, and using now the mathematical textbook in Japan is that big and that wide. And the one in the American classroom was 2 pounds. And they demonstrated how the teacher would put a problem on the board in Japan, and the students would work together to figure out the results rather than going to the textbook. And in the American classroom, it was the reverse. First it was the textbook, and then somehow you had to figure out a way upon graduation to take all this theoretical knowledge and put it into practical practice.
In a group.
Exactly.
Yes.
You know, working with other people.
Exactly.
Right. And that would be the conundrum. Neither a community public charter school or Murray High School are particularly textbook dependent. Teachers are pretty much, they'll use the SOLs as a guide, and then they're creating their curriculum and very responsive to the needs of the students. So that's part of our goal. In terms of technology, Albemarle County is a technology county. We are. But also, you know, the CPCS is an arts-infused school. So I don't really envision that we're going to be a paperless school. I want kids' hands on stuff, and I want them to feel it and play with it. And but I also want them to know how to use technology as tools, and I want them to be able to learn how to learn with it and about it, and certainly more responsively than I do. I'm trying to be a model for that, but I want them to know when a tool is valuable to them and when it's not, and to be able to be discriminating about it.
So discrimination and discernment skills are really have to be part of the modern curriculum.
Absolutely.
Because the children are just so bombarded with information that, you know, how do you filter all of it? And I'm not just talking about the computer and the television and the books, but also you could walk outside and you see billboards, and I mean, it's just, we're just information saturated. It's no wonder we have so many children with ADD, which takes me to another subject, labeling children. Tell me about, you know, I have a real adversity, even as a psychologist, with labeling children gifted, ADD, handicapped, whatever it is. How did we get to this place where, you know, and I've seen school budgets where, and I've had superintendents actually tell me, not in this state, but in other states, that they identify handicapped children in order to be able to get more funding in their schools. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. You're creating handicapped classrooms for these children in order to get more funding into the school? And they say, well, yeah, because we have to go to all these lawsuits we have where we pay $100,000 in legal fees because these parents want special things for their children because they've been diagnosed by somebody. And by the way, as a professional, there really is no test for ADD or ADHD. You know, it's all subjective. So how do you feel about all this testing, this labeling of children? And what does it do to, you know, to the community of school, to the child themselves? How do you feel about that?
I think some of those kinds of things kind of fall away in that homeschool environment. You specifically mentioned ADHD, and for an awful lot of kids, that's more of a mismatch between the environment that they're in and where that particular child is. So a parent may not even have to think about whether or not that label fits their child if their child can learn while they're moving, they're running around, they're still active, because they don't have to sit at a desk in a classroom. And so even if a child does have tendencies in that direction, it may be completely transparent when they're having a home-based education. Some kids cope so much better as they grow older that even if they go forward into school, it may never be an issue for them. On the other hand, sometimes having a label for something can serve as kind of a pointing in the right direction for where do we look for assistance with this particular type of issue. It can help people find the things that they need.
Except that people tend to rely on that, and
certainly,
you know,
that exists. But I think within that homeschool community, there are people who go out of their way to avoid having their children have labels and just cope with whatever difficulties and challenges might come into their child's life, and other people who kind of seek that in a way that is useful to their child and their family in helping their kids get to where they need to be.
In my estimation, I think we've labeled every normal behavior, you know, out of existence, in my estimation. And this is my profession. So how do you ladies feel?
At its best, as Leslie said, that can point you toward the right resources, and it might point you toward a common vocabulary and common strategies, so that kind of encapsulating a student and describing them by a title gives you some kind of common elements that might help you figure out how to best approach them. But the bottom line is every human being is an individual, and you're going to have to figure out how that student thinks and help that student understand how they think to be able to
Doesn't it create a
develop.
separation, though, when you're labeling children? I mean, we're trying to build community here in the school, and that kind of separates children
I think
from
in
each
the public
other.
schools much less than it
Really?
used to, and I think certainly in both at CPCS and at Murray, I don't think students think of each other that way at all. I don't think they pay that much attention.
Might be
Well,
the
that's-
only
Sometimes they're
benefit to-
seeing somebody else is getting some
wonder if
help.
it's-
How do I get some of that?
I wonder if it's a common, because it's so
Yeah.
common
Might
now
be the
that
only
it
benefit to having so many kids have labels is that it's just not that big a deal.
becomes gray. Yeah.
Well, I joke around sometimes and say ADD is children in need of attention, basically.
Or in need of exercise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yes, absolutely. Exercise, and I mean, we sit children. Everything is just has become so unnatural, in our culture that just a little bit of exercise transforms their behavior or diet. I had a child in first grade. He was just the most amazing behavior problem, and when I sat down with his mother, I realized that breakfast, lunch, and dinner was a bag of candy, a bag of chips. When the sugar was taken out of his life, he became a completely different person. So, these are all the kinds of things that you all have to deal with in terms of working with children, all these outside kinds of influences. You're trying to create a culture of community with all this external pressure, being placed upon the schools, the homeschooling, everything, all these external pressures, when it would be just so much nicer if we could have something that comes out of the inner school, the inside of the school out, rather than all these external pressures from the outside. But can you understand how business wants, all these, business and industry wants all these technologies and ramifications and things like that? So we are almost at our stopping point here, and can you tell me in about 30 seconds what a good education is? Do you have we pretty much dealt with all we've pretty much dealt with all the areas in terms of what a good education is. And I just want to remind our audience that I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski. This is what Wize Women Want. You can find out more about all of our panelists, our conversations on this program at www.whatwizewomenwant, and Wize is spelled with a Z.com. We're here with you every week in different topics. Our topic this week was what constitutes a good education. Next week, we're going to be talking about daycare, preschool, or home care. What is the best for your infant and toddler and child? Every week we do something different here on Charlottesville Public Access Television, Comcast Channel 13. And we also have fireside chats at City Space every third Saturday of the month. And our next topic will be about money and finance, and try to help you in dealing with retirement, with balancing a budget, and all those types of things. We also have women's groups, and you can find out all of this on our website. And we look forward to hearing from you, asking us questions, and possibly for our next program on daycare. I'd like to leave you with a little quote from Aristotle that I think is appropriate for this topic that we did today. Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. And I want to thank our guests. You've done a fantastic job by giving us a perspective of charter schools, homeschooling, private schools, and their ramifications in terms of what a good education looks like, because I think you all really reflect that in the kinds of models that you represent. And I want to thank you for your input, and you did a really great job. Thank you. And we hope to see you again next week. Have a good evening.